Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, each drop catching the colored light and scattering it across the marble floor like fractured rainbows. Inside the bridal preparation room, Madison Cole stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable beneath layers of white lace and silk. The wedding dress hugged her slender frame perfectly, custom-made by a designer whose name she could barely pronounce, paid for by parents who saw this day as a business merger rather than a celebration of love. Her dark hair had been swept up into an elaborate updo, tiny diamonds winking from between the curls, and her makeup was flawless, applied by hands that cost more per hour than most people earned in a day. But beneath all that perfection, Madison's green eyes were wide with panic, her hands trembling as they clutched the bouquet of white roses and peonies. This isn't right, she thought, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the string quartet warming up in the sanctuary. This isn't what I want. Through the door, she could hear the muffled sounds of 300 guests taking their seats, the low hum of expensive perfume, and even more expensive conversation. Her mother had invited everyone who mattered in New York's elite circles, turning what should have been an intimate ceremony into a spectacle designed to cement the Cole family's social standing. And the groom, Preston Hartford III, was the crown jewel of that ambition, heir to a banking fortune that stretched back 5 generations, a man Madison had dated for exactly 8 months before he proposed at a charity gala with a ring that cost more than most houses. She had said yes because everyone expected her to, because Preston was handsome and successful and appropriate, because her parents had made it clear that this marriage would secure their family's financial future in ways that mattered to them far more than her happiness. But now, standing in this room with her reflection staring back at her like a beautiful stranger, Madison realized she couldn't do it. She couldn't walk down that aisle and promise forever to a man she didn't love, couldn't spend the rest of her life playing the role of the perfect society wife, attending the right parties and saying the right things, and slowly disappearing into someone else's idea of who she should be. The door opened, and her mother swept in, elegant in champagne silk, her expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning. The photographer wants a few more shots before we begin, and your father is ready to walk you down the aisle in 15 minutes. Madison's throat tightened. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." "Not now, sweetheart. Whatever it is can wait until after the ceremony. We have a schedule to keep, and the guests are waiting." But Madison's hands were shaking so badly now that petals were falling from her bouquet. "Mom, I can't do this." Her mother's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Madison Cole, you are not having cold feet. Not today. Not with 300 people out there, and Preston's family, and our entire future riding on this wedding. I can't marry him. I don't love him." "Love?" Her mother's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Love is what comes after marriage, darling. After you've built a life together, and raised a family, and secured your place in the world. Right now, you're just nervous, and that's perfectly natural. But you are going to walk out that door, down that aisle, and marry Preston Hartford, because that is what we have planned, what everyone expects, and what you agreed to do." "But I didn't know," Madison whispered, tears starting to blur her carefully applied makeup. "I didn't know it would feel like this, like I'm disappearing." Her mother gripped her shoulders, fingers digging in through the delicate lace. "Listen to me very carefully. You are 26 years old, and you have lived your entire life in comfort and privilege. This wedding is your responsibility, your duty to this family. Now pull yourself together, fix your face, and be ready in 10 minutes. The door closed with a decisive click, and Madison stood frozen, her reflection wavering through unshed tears. Outside, she could hear the guests settling into their seats, the string quartet beginning the prelude, the whole elaborate machinery of the wedding grinding into motion. And suddenly, like a wild animal sensing a trap closing around it, Madison knew she had to run. Her hands moved with surprising speed, pulling the veil from her hair and tossing it onto the vanity. She grabbed her phone, stuffing it into the small clutch bag her mother had selected to match her dress. The window, she thought frantically, her eyes darting to the narrow stained glass window that overlooked the cathedral's side garden. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through, but Madison was desperate enough to try. She hitched up her massive skirt, the layers of tulle and silk rustling like whispers of scandal, and climbed onto the window seat. The latch was old and stiff, and her perfectly manicured nails broke as she struggled to force it open. Finally, with a groan of ancient hinges, the window swung outward, letting in a blast of cold rain and the smell of wet roses from the garden below. Madison didn't let herself think about what she was doing, about the 300 guests waiting inside, or the groom standing at the altar, or her parents' faces when they discovered she was gone. She thought only about freedom, about the possibility of a life that was actually hers. And she squeezed through the window, her wedding dress catching and tearing on the stone frame as she dropped into the garden below. The fall was farther than she expected, and she landed hard on the wet grass, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. But adrenaline pushed her forward, and she gathered up her ruined skirt and ran, her bare feet slipping on the rain-soaked path as she fled from the cathedral. From Preston, from the life her parents had so carefully constructed for her, she had no plan, no destination. Only the desperate need to get as far away as possible before anyone realized she was gone. The parking lot behind the cathedral was full of luxury cars, sleek vehicles worth more than most people's homes, all arranged in neat rows by professional valets. Madison darted between them, her white dress standing out like a beacon against the dark pavement, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear shouting now from inside the cathedral, voices raised in confusion and alarm. They had discovered her absence. Behind her, the cathedral doors burst open, and she heard her mother's voice, shrill and furious, calling her name. Madison's panic spiked, her heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape her chest. She needed to hide, needed to disappear, needed to find somewhere, anywhere, that would keep her safe for just a few moments, while she figured out what to do next. And then she saw it. A black Mercedes with tinted windows, its engine running, parked at the edge of the lot away from the other cars. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct and fear, Madison wrenched open the back door and threw herself inside, slamming it shut behind her and ducking down below the window line, her dress billowing around her like a cloud of white silk and desperation. For a moment, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady drum of rain on the car roof. Then a voice, deep and smooth and laced with surprise, cut through her panic. "Well, this is unexpected." Madison froze, her heart stopping mid-beat. Slowly, she lifted her head and found herself staring at a man in the driver's seat, his reflection visible in the rearview mirror. Dark hair, sharp jawline, steel gray eyes that watched her with a mixture of amusement and concern. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, the kind that cost more than her entire wardrobe, and there was something in his calm expression that suggested he was rarely caught off guard. But Madison Cole hiding in his back seat had apparently done the trick. "I'm sorry," Madison gasped, still trying to catch her breath. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm being chased, and I didn't know where else to go." The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes taking in her torn wedding dress, her wild hair with diamonds still clinging to the disheveled curls, her bare feet covered in mud and grass stains. "Being chased?" His tone was careful, measured. Should I be calling the police? No. Madison's response came out too quickly, too desperate. Please, no. I need a few minutes. Just a few minutes to think, and then I'll leave, I promise. I won't cause you any trouble. The man was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to the rearview mirror, where Madison could now see figures emerging from the cathedral, her mother and father, and probably Preston too, all of them scanning the parking lot. His eyes returned to Madison, taking in her terrified expression, the way she was trembling despite the car's warmth. You're running from your own wedding. It wasn't a question. Madison nodded, unable to form words, expecting him to tell her to get out, to face her responsibilities, to do what everyone else had been telling her to do. Instead, he reached over and locked all the doors with a decisive click. Hold on, he said simply. And before Madison could respond, he shifted the car into gear and pulled smoothly out of the parking lot, leaving the cathedral and her abandoned wedding behind, in a spray of rain and scandal. Madison twisted in her seat, watching through the rear window as her mother spotted the moving car, her face contorting with rage and disbelief. But the Mercedes was already turning onto the main road, carrying Madison away from the life she had almost been trapped in, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could actually breathe. Where are we going? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. The man's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror again, and there was something almost gentle in his expression now. Wherever you need to go. But first, maybe you should tell me your name. Madison. Her throat was tight with emotion. Madison Cole. The man's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, so briefly Madison almost missed it. And then he said, in that same calm voice, I'm Alexander Kane. The name hit Madison like a physical blow. Alexander Kane. The Alexander Kane. The youngest self-made billionaire in New York, founder of Kane Industries, the man whose face appeared regularly in Forbes and Fortune and every other publication that tracked the movements of the wealthy and powerful. The man her parents had tried for years to introduce her to, throwing her at him at various charity galas and society events, hoping to arrange exactly the kind of advantageous marriage they had eventually settled for with Preston when Alexander had shown no interest. And now here she was, soaking wet in a ruined wedding dress, hiding in his car like some kind of dramatic fugitive. Oh God, Madison buried her face in her hands. Oh God, this is so much worse. I didn't recognize you. I'm so sorry. I should never have. You're running from your wedding, Alexander cut in smoothly, his tone surprisingly kind. I think under those circumstances, identifying the owner of the car you jumped into probably wasn't your top priority. He had a point. Madison forced herself to lower her hands and meet his eyes in the mirror. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Actually, his lips curved into a slight smile. We've met before. Several times, in fact. Various charity events over the past few years. You probably don't remember. You were usually busy trying to escape from whoever your parents had set you up with for the evening. Madison felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. I remember. She did remember. Flashes of a tall man with intense gray eyes watching her from across crowded ballrooms, always polite when they were introduced, but never pursuing her the way other men did, never playing into her parents' obvious machinations. I remember you never seemed interested. I wasn't interested in being part of someone else's business arrangement, Alexander replied. But I was interested in the girl who spent those parties looking like a bird in a cage, counting the minutes until she could escape. The observation was so accurate it made Madison's chest ache. That's exactly what it felt like. He nodded, his expression thoughtful as he navigated through traffic, the rain still pouring down around them. So when that same girl throws herself into my car in a wedding dress, running from what I assume was supposed to be a very strategic marriage, I'm inclined to help rather than hand her back to her captors. Madison let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you. You might want to hold off on the gratitude until you know where I'm taking you." A spike of fear shot through her. "Where are you taking me?" Alexander met her eyes in the mirror again, and there was something reassuring in his steady gaze. Somewhere safe, somewhere dry, somewhere you can figure out what happens next without anyone pressuring you or making decisions for you. He paused. "Unless you'd prefer I take you back to the cathedral?" "No." Madison's response was immediate and emphatic. "Anywhere but there. Then trust me for the next hour, and we'll get you somewhere warm where you can think clearly." Madison studied him in the mirror. This man who had appeared like some kind of unlikely guardian angel just when she needed escape the most. There was something solid about Alexander Kane, something that suggested if he said he would help her, he meant it without strings or ulterior motives. Maybe it was foolish to trust a stranger, even one whose reputation preceded him. But Madison had spent her entire life being careful and appropriate, and doing what was expected. And where had it gotten her? Standing in a wedding dress she didn't choose, about to marry a man she didn't love, living a life that had been designed by everyone except herself. So maybe it was time to take a risk. "Okay," she said quietly. "I trust you." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, gone too quickly for Madison to identify, but his voice was steady when he replied. "Good. Now sit back and try to relax. We have about 40 minutes before we reach my place upstate." "You're taking me to your house?" Alexander shrugged, his attention on the road, as they merged onto the highway heading north out of the city. "I'm taking you somewhere your parents won't think to look immediately. Somewhere you can catch your breath and figure out your next move. Unless you have a better idea." Madison thought about her apartment in Manhattan, the one her parents paid for and had a key to. She thought about her friends, all of whom were at the cathedral right now, probably bombarding her phone with frantic messages. She pulled out her phone and saw the screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and texts, her mother's name appearing over and over in increasingly desperate and angry messages. "No," Madison said, turning the phone off completely. "I don't have a better idea." The drive north took them out of the city and into the countryside, where sprawling estates hid behind stone walls and ancient trees. The rain began to ease as they climbed into the hills, and Madison found herself mesmerized by the landscape sliding past the windows, so different from the steel and glass world she had grown up in. Alexander didn't try to fill the silence with empty conversation, seeming to understand that she needed time to process what she had just done, the magnitude of the choice she had made. And it was a choice, Madison realized, as the adrenaline began to fade and reality set in. She had just run from her own wedding, abandoned Preston at the altar in front of 300 guests, humiliated her parents, and destroyed months of careful planning. There would be consequences, serious ones, and Madison had no idea how she was going to face them. But even knowing all that, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Eventually, Alexander turned off the main highway onto a private road, and Madison sat up straighter, trying to see where they were heading. Through the trees, she caught glimpses of a house, or rather an estate, sprawling across the hilltop with walls of glass and stone that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. It was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with showing off wealth and everything to do with understanding how to live in harmony with the natural world. "This is your place," Madison breathed, unable to hide her surprise. "One of them," Alexander replied as he pulled up to the front entrance. "I come here when I need to think, when the city gets too loud." He cut the engine and turned in his seat to face her properly for the first time. "Before we go inside, I need you to understand something. You don't owe me anything. You can stay here as long as you need, figure out your next steps, and then leave whenever you're ready. I'm not going to pressure you, judge you, or expect anything from you." Madison felt tears prick her eyes again at the simple kindness in his words. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Alexander's expression softened. "Let's just say I recognize someone trying to escape a life they didn't choose. And I believe everyone deserves the chance to make their own decisions, even if those decisions make everyone else uncomfortable." He got out of the car and came around to open Madison's door, extending his hand to help her out. Her legs were shaky as she stood, and she winced as pain shot through her twisted ankle. "You're hurt," Alexander observed, his brow furrowing with concern. "It's nothing. Just twisted it when I jumped out the window." "You jumped out a window?" There was something that might have been admiration in his tone. "In a wedding dress?" "I was desperate," Madison admitted, leaning on his arm as they made their way to the front door. "And the window seemed like my only option at the time." "Remind me never to corner you," Alexander murmured, and Madison caught the hint of a smile on his lips. Inside, the house was as stunning as the exterior promised, all clean lines and natural light, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the hills and a fireplace made of river stone that dominated one wall. But what struck Madison most was how comfortable it felt, lived in rather than showplace perfect, with books scattered on tables and a blanket thrown over the back of the sofa. Alexander guided her to the couch, his touch gentle but firm. "Sit. I'll get you something dry to wear and take a look at that ankle." As he disappeared up a floating staircase, Madison sank into the cushions and let herself truly absorb what had just happened. She had run from her wedding. She was in Alexander Kane's house, soaking wet in a ruined designer gown, with no plan and no idea what came next. And somehow, impossibly, she felt more herself than she had in months. Alexander returned carrying a stack of clothes, soft gray sweatpants, and a black cashmere sweater that looked enormous, but incredibly warm. "The bathroom is through there," he indicated a door off the main living space. "Take your time. When you're ready, I'll wrap that ankle, and we can figure out if you need a doctor." Madison took the clothes, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for so much more than just the borrowed outfit. Alexander held her gaze for a moment, and Madison felt something shift in the air between them, a connection forming that had nothing to do with charity events or business arrangements, and everything to do with two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. "You're welcome, Madison Cole," he said softly. "Now go get out of that dress before you catch pneumonia." In the bathroom, Madison carefully peeled off the wet wedding gown, watching in the mirror as layers of silk and lace fell away, taking with them the last remnants of the life she had almost accepted. Underneath, she was just herself, 26 years old, and terrified and free. She pulled on Alexander's clothes, rolling up the sleeves and waistband multiple times until they fit well enough to move in, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him that clung to the fabric. When she emerged, Alexander had started a fire in the massive fireplace and was setting out a first aid kit on the coffee table. He gestured to the couch. "Sit. Let me see that ankle." Madison settled onto the cushions, extending her injured foot, and Alexander knelt before her, his movements careful as he examined the swelling. "It's not broken," he announced after a moment. "Just a bad sprain. Ice, elevation, and rest should take care of it." His hands were gentle as he wrapped the ankle in an elastic bandage, and Madison found herself watching his face, noting the concentration in his expression, the way his dark hair fell slightly forward over his forehead. There was something almost intimate about the moment, this powerful man kneeling at her feet, taking care of her without expectation or demand. "All set," Alexander said, finishing the wrapping and looking up to meet her eyes. "How does it feel?" "Better," Madison admitted. "Thank you. You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She bit her lip. I don't understand why you're being so kind. You barely know me, and I've basically brought chaos to your doorstep." Alexander settled into the chair across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Can I tell you something?" Madison nodded. "When I was younger, just starting out in business, I was engaged once. Her name was Victoria, and she came from exactly the kind of family mine desperately wanted me to marry into. It was all arranged, all perfect on paper." Madison leaned forward, drawn into his story despite herself. "What happened?" Alexander's smile was rueful. "I realized about a week before the wedding that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, that I was marrying her because everyone expected me to, because it made sense for business and family connections, because I was too much of a coward to admit I wanted something different. So I called it off, and it caused a massive scandal. Both families were furious, the media had a field day, and I lost some business relationships that mattered." Madison's heart was pounding. "But you did it anyway? You called it off?" "Best decision I ever made," Alexander said firmly, "because it taught me that living your life according to other people's expectations is a slow death. You disappear piece by piece until you don't recognize yourself anymore." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "So when I see someone having the courage to run, to choose themselves even when it's terrifying, and everyone will judge them, I'm going to help, because I know how hard it is, and I know how much strength it takes." Madison felt tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm going to do. My parents are going to disown me. Preston and his family will sue us, probably. Everyone I know is going to think I'm crazy, or cruel, or both." "You might be right about all of that," Alexander acknowledged, "but you'll survive it. And on the other side, you'll have something worth more than their approval. You'll have your freedom." Madison wiped her eyes, trying to smile through the tears. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," Alexander corrected. "It's incredibly complicated and messy and difficult. But it's yours. That's what matters." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them, and Madison felt something settling in her chest, a determination she hadn't known she possessed. "You're right," she said finally. "It's going to be awful, but at least it will be my awful. At least I'll be making my own mistakes instead of living someone else's perfect life." Alexander smiled, a real smile this time, that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "That's the spirit. Now, are you hungry? I can't promise gourmet cuisine, but I make a decent omelet." Madison realized with surprise that she was starving, hadn't eaten since breakfast, because she'd been too nervous about the wedding. An omelet sounds perfect. She started to stand, but Alexander waved her back down. "You stay put and keep that ankle elevated. I'll cook. You can keep me company from there." In the kitchen, which was open to the living area, Alexander moved with surprising competence, cracking eggs and chopping vegetables, while Madison watched from the couch. It was strangely domestic, comfortable in a way that made her acutely aware of how different this felt from every interaction she'd ever had with Preston. With Preston, everything had been formal, structured, appropriate. Dinner at the right restaurants, conversation about the right topics, kisses that were perfectly pleasant, but never made her forget where she was. But sitting here in Alexander's clothes, watching him cook in his own kitchen, while rain pattered against the windows, Madison felt more alive than she had in years. "So," Alexander said as he worked, "what were you planning to do after the wedding?" Assuming it had gone through, Madison grimaced. "I don't know. Exactly what was expected, I suppose. Move into Preston's apartment, plan charity events, smile at the right parties, eventually have children who would be raised by nannies while I maintained my figure and my social calendar." Her voice was bitter. "Sounds like a prison sentence. It was. She watched as he plated the omelets with surprising artistry. How did you know? That you wanted something different? Alexander brought the plates over, handing her one before settling into the chair across from her again. I didn't at first. I thought success meant building the biggest company, making the most money, impressing all the right people. But then I hit 30 and realized I was miserable. I had everything I was supposed to want, and I felt empty. So I started making changes, stepping back from some businesses, spending more time on projects that actually mattered to me rather than just made money. Building this place, learning to live on my own terms instead of everyone else's expectations. Madison took a bite of the omelet, which was actually delicious, and considered his words. "And are you happy now?" "Happier," Alexander replied. "Still figuring it out, but at least I'm figuring out my own life, not performing someone else's version of what my life should be." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Madison found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something solid about Alexander Kane, something that suggested he knew exactly who he was and didn't apologize for it. It was attractive in a way that had nothing to do with his looks or his money, and everything to do with the quiet confidence he carried. "When you called off your wedding," Madison asked, "did you have someone waiting? Someone you actually loved?" Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. That was part of the problem, actually. I ended the engagement because I knew I didn't love Victoria, but I didn't have some grand romance waiting in the wings. People kept asking me if there was someone else, like that was the only acceptable reason to walk away from what looked perfect on paper. But sometimes the reason is just that you want a chance to find out who you are without someone else defining you. Madison set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone, as the full weight of everything she'd done crashed over her again. "I haven't even thought about what comes next, where I'll live, what I'll do. My job at the gallery was basically a favor to my parents' friends. My apartment, my car, everything is tied to them somehow." Her voice rose with panic. "I have maybe $3,000 in an account they don't control, and that's it." Alexander's voice was calm, steady. "Breathe, Madison. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. But I can't just hide here forever." "You can stay as long as you need to," Alexander replied firmly. "And when you're ready to face the world again, I can help. I know people who can find you real work, places to live that aren't connected to your parents. You're not as trapped as you feel right now." "But they'll come looking for me," Madison protested. "My mother probably already has private investigators tracking my phone." "I turned it off," Alexander reminded her. "And this property is private, gated, registered under a trust. Even if they figure out you're with me, which is a stretch, they can't just show up and demand you back. You're an adult making your own choices." The reassurance in his words helped calm the panic spiraling in Madison's chest. She took a deep breath, then another. Okay, you're right. One step at a time." "That's all anyone can do," Alexander agreed. "Now finish your omelet before it gets cold, and then I'll show you to the guest room. You need rest, more than anything else right now." But Madison found herself reluctant to end the conversation, to retreat to a bedroom alone with only her thoughts for company. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why were you at the cathedral today, if you weren't invited to the wedding?" A strange expression crossed Alexander's face, something that might have been embarrassment. "I was invited, actually. Your mother has been trying to get me to various Cole family events for years. I usually decline, but today I thought," he paused, meeting her eyes. "I thought maybe I should go. Make sure you were actually okay with what was happening." Madison's heart skipped. "You came to check on me?" Alexander shrugged, but there was color in his cheeks now. "I remembered you from those charity events. How you always looked like you wanted to be anywhere else. How you'd disappear the moment you could. And when I saw the wedding announcement, something didn't sit right. I thought maybe I was being presumptuous, that maybe you were genuinely happy, and I was projecting my own experience. But I wanted to see for myself. So you were just sitting in your car, trying to decide if I was crazy, Alexander admitted. And then you solved that question by throwing yourself into my back seat, in full bridal regalia. Madison started laughing. Couldn't help it. The absurdity of the entire situation hitting her all at once. I have terrible timing. Or perfect timing, depending on your perspective, Alexander countered, his own lips curving. After all, you found exactly the right car to hide in. The one person at that wedding who understood what you were running from. They smiled at each other across the coffee table, and Madison felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. There was something happening here, something she hadn't expected and probably shouldn't pursue, given that her aborted wedding was only a few hours old. But she couldn't deny the connection forming between them, the sense that Alexander Kane saw her in a way no one else ever had. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her, the adrenaline crash leaving her barely able to keep her eyes open. Alexander noticed, as he seemed to notice everything, and stood. "Come on. Let me show you where you can sleep." He helped her up the stairs, supporting her weight on her injured ankle, and led her to a bedroom that was simple but elegant, with a massive bed, covered in soft linens, and more floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the darkening hills. "The bathroom is through there," Alexander indicated. "There should be everything you need. And if you can't sleep or need anything, I'm just down the hall." Madison turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed by his kindness. "Alexander, I don't know how to thank you for this. For any of this." "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "Just promise me something." "What?" "That you won't regret choosing yourself. That no matter how hard the next few weeks are, you'll remember that you deserve a life that's actually yours." Madison felt tears prick her eyes again. "I promise." "Good." Alexander hesitated, then reached out and squeezed her hand briefly before letting go. "Sleep well, Madison Cole. And try not to worry about tomorrow. We'll figure it out together." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Madison sank onto the bed, her mind spinning. What had just happened? In the space of a few hours, she had run from her wedding, found refuge with a man she barely knew, and somehow felt safer than she had in months. It didn't make sense, any of it. And yet, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that jumping into Alexander Kane's car had been the first real choice she'd made in years. That night, Madison slept deeply, her dreams filled with gray eyes and steady voices, and the sensation of being seen for exactly who she was. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and for a blessed moment she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. She had really done it. She had run from her wedding, and now she had to face the consequences. Madison reached for her phone, then remembered it was still turned off in her clutch bag, probably for the best. She wasn't ready to face the barrage of messages and calls that were undoubtedly waiting. Instead, she got up carefully, testing her ankle, which was still sore, but less painful than the night before. Someone, Alexander, had left fresh clothes folded on a chair near the door, women's yoga pants and a soft t-shirt that actually fit her. Madison showered quickly, washing away the last remnants of expensive hairspray and makeup, and studied her reflection. Without all the bridal finery, she looked younger, more herself. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was a mess. But there was also something different in her expression, a spark that hadn't been there before. Downstairs, she found Alexander in the kitchen making coffee, dressed in jeans and a gray Henley that made him look less like a billionaire CEO and more like someone who belonged in this beautiful, peaceful house. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "How's the ankle?" "Better," Madison replied, accepting the mug he handed her. "And how are you feeling about everything?" Madison took a sip of coffee, considering. Terrified, relieved, guilty, free. All of it at once. "That sounds about right," Alexander said. "I made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just fruit and toast. But we should probably talk about your next steps." Madison's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she nodded. "You're right. I can't hide forever." They sat at the kitchen island, and Alexander pulled out a notepad. "Okay, let's approach this practically. First, do you have any money that's entirely your own?" Madison thought about her trust fund, which her parents controlled until she was 30, or got married. "Only about $3,000 in my personal account. Everything else is either controlled by my parents or was going to transfer to Preston's management after the wedding." Alexander made a note. "That's enough to start with. You'll need to open a new account at a bank your parents don't use, somewhere they can't pressure to give them information. Next, housing. Your apartment is in your name?" "My name, but they pay the rent and have keys. I can't go back there. Do you have friends you could stay with? People your parents wouldn't immediately think of?" Madison shook her head slowly. "Everyone I'm close with is part of my parents' social circle. They'd either turn me in immediately or leak where I was within hours." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Then you stay here, at least for the next few weeks while you get your feet under you." Madison's heart skipped. "I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering." He met her eyes steadily. "Madison, you need somewhere safe to land while you figure out your next move. This house is big enough for both of us, private enough that your parents can't easily find you, and I'm here most of the time anyway, working remotely. It makes sense. But what about your life? Your work? I can manage both." Alexander's tone was firm, and honestly, I've been thinking about what I said last night, about helping people find their own paths. Maybe this is how I start actually doing that instead of just talking about it. Madison felt tears well up, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I don't deserve this." "Yes," Alexander said quietly, "you do. You deserve support and safety and time to figure out who you want to be. Everyone deserves that." Before Madison could respond, her phone buzzed from where she'd left it on the counter. They both stared at it. "You're going to have to turn it on eventually," Alexander said gently. "Face whatever's waiting." Madison took a deep breath and powered on the phone. Immediately, it exploded with notifications, hundreds of messages and missed calls. Her mother's name dominated the screen, along with Preston, her father, several cousins, and friends. There were also numerous calls from numbers she didn't recognize, probably reporters who had somehow gotten her cell number. One text from her mother stood out, sent just an hour ago. "Madison, this has gone far enough. Come home immediately, and we will discuss how to salvage this situation. You have embarrassed this family beyond measure, but we can still fix this if you act now. Preston is willing to postpone, rather than cancel, if you apologize and explain you had a mental breakdown due to wedding stress. Do not make this worse than it already is." Madison showed the text to Alexander, whose expression darkened. Mental breakdown? That's their angle? Apparently acknowledging I might have legitimate reasons for running is too difficult, Madison said bitterly. She scrolled through more messages, finding similar themes. Friends concerned about her sanity, relatives angry about the embarrassment, Preston's surprisingly calm message saying they needed to talk. And then, near the bottom, a text from her younger sister Olivia. "Mads, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. Everyone here is losing their minds. But honestly, I'm kind of proud of you. You always did what everyone expected, and maybe it's time you did what you wanted. Be safe. Call me when you can, but only when you're ready. Love you." Madison felt fresh tears spill over. At least Olivia understood. At least someone in her family saw this as something other than betrayal. "Do you want to respond to any of them?" Alexander asked. Madison considered, then began typing a message to her mother. "Mom, I'm safe and I'm fine. I'm sorry for the embarrassment, but I couldn't marry Preston. I know you don't understand, but I need time to figure out my own life. Please respect that." She sent it before she could second-guess herself, then typed a similar message to Preston. "Preston, I'm sorry for hurting you, but marrying you would have been wrong for both of us. You deserve someone who loves you fully, and that's not me. I hope someday you can forgive me." The responses came almost immediately. Her mother's message was venomous. "You selfish, ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You've destroyed our reputation, our business relationships, everything. Don't bother coming home until you're ready to apologize and fix this disaster." Preston's was surprisingly measured. "Madison, I'm not angry. Disappointed, yes, and hurt. But if you weren't sure, I'm glad you didn't go through with it. I just wish you'd told me before the actual wedding day. Take the time you need. But we will need to talk eventually about untangling all the legal and financial arrangements." He was being remarkably decent about it, which somehow made Madison feel even more guilty. She showed Alexander both responses. "Your mother is going to be difficult," he observed. "But Preston seems reasonable. That might make things easier in the long run." Madison set the phone down, feeling exhausted, despite having just woken up. "What am I going to do, Alexander? I don't even know where to start." "We start with the basics," Alexander said practically. "First, you need employment, something that's yours, that your parents can't take away. What do you actually want to do? Not what they pushed you into, but what interests you." Madison thought about the gallery job she'd held for the past 2 years, greeting visitors and organizing events. It had been fine, easy, but it had never felt meaningful. "I studied art history in college," she said slowly. "I loved it, actually. The research, the analysis, understanding how art reflects culture and society. But my parents thought it was impractical, pushed me into the social side of the art world instead of the academic side. Could you go back to school? Get a graduate degree?" Madison's eyes widened. "I never even considered it. They made it clear that further education was a waste when I was going to get married anyway." Alexander pulled out his phone, already searching. There are several excellent art history programs in the area. NYU, Columbia, even some international options if you wanted to really start fresh. You could apply for the spring semester, and if your parents won't pay, there are loans and scholarships. The possibility opened up before Madison like a door she hadn't known existed. Going back to school, pursuing something she actually cared about, building a career based on her own interests rather than her family's expectations. It felt impossible and exciting and terrifying all at once. But what would I live on while I was studying? I couldn't ask you to support me. "You could work part-time," Alexander suggested. "Or, and hear me out before you protest, I could hire you." Madison frowned. "As what? Your assistant or something?" "I don't want charity." "Not as my assistant," Alexander said. "As a researcher. One of my companies specializes in art acquisition and authentication for corporate collections. We could actually use someone with your background to help vet pieces and research provenance. It would be real work, Madison, not charity, and it would give you income while you studied." Madison stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You barely know me." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Because when I see someone brave enough to choose themselves, I want to help them succeed. And because, he paused, I think you're more than just some society girl running from a wedding. I think you're smart and interesting, and you deserve a chance to find out who you are without everyone else's expectations weighing you down. His words settled around Madison like a warm blanket, and she felt something shift in her chest. This man, this unexpected guardian angel who had appeared at exactly the right moment, saw something in her that she had almost stopped believing existed. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. Okay, let's do it. I'll apply to graduate programs. I'll take the research job if you're serious about it. And I'll figure out how to build a life that's actually mine. I'm completely serious, Alexander assured her. And Madison, you don't have to figure it all out today. Take the time you need to heal, to process everything that's happened. The job will be there when you're ready. And in the meantime, you're safe here. The next few days fell into a strange but comfortable rhythm. Madison spent her mornings researching graduate programs and working on applications, her afternoons helping Alexander with preliminary research on art pieces his company was considering acquiring. She discovered she loved the work, the detective-like process of tracing a painting's history and verifying its authenticity. Alexander worked from his home office most days, emerging from meals and casual conversations that ranged from art to philosophy to the absurd complications of running multiple companies. Madison found herself looking forward to those moments, the way his serious expression would soften when he smiled, the sound of his rare laugh when she said something unexpectedly funny. She tried not to think too much about the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he walked into a room, or the way her heart skipped when their hands accidentally touched passing papers back and forth. This wasn't the time for complicated feelings, not when her abandoned wedding was barely a week in the past and her life was still in chaos. But it was hard to ignore the pull between them, the easy comfort that felt less like two strangers cohabiting and more like two people who had been moving toward this moment for years without knowing it. On the fifth night, they made dinner together, moving around the kitchen in synchronized harmony that suggested they'd been doing this for much longer than a week. Madison was chopping vegetables while Alexander prepared chicken, and they were debating the merits of different art movements when Madison's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. It was her father, calling for the first time since the wedding. Alexander noticed her expression. You don't have to answer if you're not ready. Madison took a deep breath. No, I should. I can't avoid them forever. She accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Hello, Dad. Madison. Her father's voice was cold, controlled. Your mother and I need to speak with you, in person. I'm not coming home right now, Madison said, keeping her voice as steady as she could. I need more time. Time for what? To continue this tantrum? To further embarrass your family? We have reporters calling every day, Madison. Preston's family is threatening to sue us for breach of contract. Our business partners are reconsidering their commitments. You've created a disaster that affects more people than just yourself. Madison felt Alexander step closer, his presence a silent support. I'm sorry about the timing and the way it happened. But Dad, I couldn't marry Preston. I didn't love him, and it wouldn't have been fair to either of us. Love? Her father's laugh was harsh. Marriage isn't about love, Madison. It's about partnership, building a future, securing your place in the world. You threw away a perfectly good match for some romantic fantasy. It wasn't a fantasy, Madison protested, her voice rising. It was wanting a life where I got to make my own choices, where I wasn't just a chess piece in your business strategy. We gave you everything, her father snapped. The best schools, the best opportunities, entry into society that most people would kill for. And you've repaid us by throwing it all back in our faces. I'm grateful for what you gave me, Madison said, though her hands were shaking now. "But I'm 26 years old, Dad. I need to live my own life, not the one you planned for me." "Then do it without our support," her father said coldly. "Since you want independence so badly, you can have it. Your trust fund is frozen, your credit cards are canceled, and your apartment lease will not be renewed next month. If you want to make your own choices, you can deal with your own consequences." "Dad," Madison whispered, feeling like she'd been punched. "I'm sorry, but I'm done being disappointed in you, Madison. When you're ready to apologize and repair the damage you've caused, you know where to find us. Until then, consider yourself on your own." The call ended abruptly, leaving Madison staring at the phone in shock. She had expected anger, expected punishment even. But the finality in her father's voice made everything suddenly, devastatingly real. Her hands were trembling so badly, she nearly dropped the phone, and she felt Alexander's arm come around her shoulders, steady and warm. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That was brutal." "I knew they'd be angry," Madison said, her voice breaking. "But I didn't think they'd actually cut me off completely. I didn't think my own father would just discard me like that." Alexander turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Madison. What he just did says everything about him and nothing about you. You are not disposable. You are not a disappointment, and you are not alone." "But I don't have anything now," Madison said, tears spilling over. "No money, no home, no family. Everything I thought I could fall back on is gone." "You have yourself," Alexander said firmly. "You have your intelligence and your talent and your courage. You have a job waiting when you're ready, and a place to stay for as long as you need it. And you have me, for whatever that's worth." Madison looked up at him, at the intensity in his gray eyes, and felt something crack open in her chest. "It's worth everything," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had named, but both felt building since that first day in the car. Alexander's hands were still on her shoulders, his thumbs moving in small, comforting circles, and Madison was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to lean forward just a little bit. Then Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment, and they stepped apart quickly. He answered it with visible reluctance, his tone professional as he dealt with some business crisis. Madison used the interruption to collect herself, wiping her tears and taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. She couldn't fall for Alexander Kane. It was too soon, too complicated, too much like jumping from one dependence to another. But as she watched him pace across the room, his voice confident as he solved whatever problem had arisen, Madison knew she was already falling. Over the next week, Madison threw herself into her applications and research work, trying to create enough distance to think clearly about everything happening. Her graduate school essays poured out of her, years of suppressed passion for art history, finally finding voice. Alexander read them and declared them brilliant, though Madison suspected he was biased. She also started interviewing for part-time positions, determined to have income that wasn't dependent on Alexander's generosity, no matter how much he insisted the research job was real work. A small museum downtown offered her hours in their archives, and she accepted immediately. Slowly, piece by piece, Madison was building something that belonged to her, but the more time she spent with Alexander, the harder it became to maintain emotional distance. They fell into routines that felt dangerously domestic. Morning coffee together before work, evening walks around the property when the weather allowed, late-night conversations that ranged from silly to profound. Alexander told her about building his company from nothing, the risks he'd taken, and the mistakes he'd learned from. Madison found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, her dreams of traveling to Italy to study Renaissance art in person, her secret teenage ambition to write a book about female artists who had been erased from history, her fear that she was fundamentally unlovable because she couldn't make herself want the life her parents offered. "You're not unlovable," Alexander said quietly one night as they sat on the terrace under a blanket of stars. "You're just yourself, and anyone who can't appreciate that is missing out." "How can you know that?" Madison asked, genuinely curious. "You've only known me a couple of weeks." Alexander was silent for so long, Madison thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I've been watching you, Madison, not in a creepy way, but at those charity events over the years. And I saw someone who was kind to everyone regardless of their status, who looked at art like it could save her, who would slip outside whenever she could to breathe. Someone real in a room full of people performing. I wanted to talk to you then, but I knew your parents had an agenda, and I didn't want to be part of it. So I kept my distance and told myself I was being practical." Madison's heart was pounding. "And now you're here, and I'm not keeping my distance anymore." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Madison, I know the timing is terrible. I know you're still processing everything that happened with your wedding and your family. But I need you to know, the way I feel about you, it's not charity, and it's not obligation. It's real." Madison couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the rush of emotion flooding through her. "Alexander, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I'm not asking you for anything or expecting anything. I just needed you to know the truth, that these past couple weeks, getting to know you, seeing who you really are, it's been the best part of my year. And if you need me to step back and give you space, I will. But if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, then maybe we can see where this goes." Madison thought about Preston, about the engagement that had been all logic and no heart. She thought about her parents' cold pragmatism, their insistence that love was something that came after marriage and security. And she thought about Alexander, who had appeared exactly when she needed him most, who had asked for nothing while giving her everything she needed to find herself. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "of ruining this, of it being a rebound, of depending on you the same way I depended on my parents." "Then we go slow," Alexander said. "We take our time, and we're honest with each other. I don't want you to depend on me, Madison. I want you to stand on your own feet and choose me because you want to, not because you need to. Can you do that?" Madison searched his face in the starlight, seeing sincerity and patience, and something deeper that made her chest ache with hope. "I can try. That's all I'm asking." Alexander reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. The touch was simple but electric, and Madison felt warmth spread through her entire body. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, looking up at the stars, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. The following month brought changes that both thrilled and terrified Madison. She was accepted into Columbia's art history graduate program with a partial scholarship. The museum expanded her hours. She found a small studio apartment she could actually afford with her combined income, though Alexander insisted she take her time moving out, that there was no rush. Her parents continued their freeze-out, refusing to take her calls or respond to her attempts at reconciliation. It hurt more than Madison expected, but Alexander was right. Each day she proved to herself that she could survive without them, the stronger she became. Preston reached out once, asking to meet for coffee. Madison almost refused, but Alexander encouraged her to get closure if she needed it. The meeting was awkward, but not hostile. Preston admitted he had known something was off between them, but had ignored it because their engagement made everyone happy. He was already dating someone new, a lawyer who apparently challenged him in ways Madison never had, and he seemed genuinely content. "I'm glad you found someone," Madison told him honestly, "and I'm sorry, again, for how I handled everything." Preston smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in months. "I'm not. Looking back, I think we were both going through the motions. You running probably saved us both from a disaster of a marriage." They parted as friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, and Madison felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That chapter was truly closed now, and she was free to move forward. Her relationship with Alexander deepened slowly, carefully. He was true to his word about taking things at her pace. They went on actual dates, dinner and movies, and walks through art museums, where Madison would explain the history of various pieces, and Alexander would watch her more than the art. They kissed for the first time on a rainy afternoon when Madison brought him coffee in his office, and he pulled her into his lap, his mouth finding hers with a desperation that suggested he'd been holding back for much longer than she'd realized. The kiss was everything her kisses with Preston had never been, intense and consuming and right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you jumped into my car." Madison laughed breathlessly. "You could have mentioned it sooner." "I was trying to be noble," Alexander replied. "Give you space to figure out what you wanted without pressure." "And have you figured out what you want?" Madison asked, her heart racing. "You," Alexander said simply. "I want you, Madison Cole. Not your family's connections, or your social status, or whatever your parents thought you brought to a marriage. Just you, exactly as you are." Madison felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I want you too. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible and give myself time, but I can't help it. I want you, Alexander." He kissed her again, softer this time, and Madison melted into him. This was what she had been missing with Preston, the sense of being completely present, of every nerve ending alive with sensation. When Alexander touched her, she felt seen and desired and valued in a way that had nothing to do with what she could offer, and everything to do with who she was. As autumn turned to winter, Madison's life took on a shape that felt miraculous in its ordinariness. She attended her graduate classes and excelled, her professors praising her insight and passion. She worked at the museum and for Alexander's company, building a resume and a reputation that were entirely her own. She moved into her tiny studio apartment, but spent most weekends at Alexander's house, the two of them settling into a rhythm that felt like home. Her sister Olivia reached out regularly, defying their parents' edict, and they began rebuilding their relationship over long phone calls and occasional secret meetings. Madison even made new friends, fellow graduate students, and museum colleagues who knew her as Madison the art historian, not Madison Cole of the prominent Cole family. 6 months after the Runaway wedding, Alexander took Madison back to the cathedral, where everything had started. She hadn't been back since that rainy day, and her hands trembled as they walked up to the entrance. "Why are we here?" she asked, both curious and anxious. "Because I want to show you something," Alexander replied, leading her inside. The sanctuary was empty and quiet, late afternoon light filtering through the same stained glass windows Madison had escaped through all those months ago. Alexander led her to the exact spot where she would have stood at the altar, where she would have married Preston if she hadn't found the courage to run. "I've been thinking about that day," Alexander said, turning to face her, "about how you could have gone through with it, taken the easy path, lived the life everyone expected. But you didn't. You chose yourself, even when it cost you everything. Even when everyone said you were wrong." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "It was the scariest thing I've ever done." "I know," Alexander said softly, "and I'm so proud of you for doing it. Because if you hadn't, if you'd married Preston, I never would have gotten to know the real you. I never would have fallen in love with you." Madison's heart stopped. "You love me?" "I'm completely in love with you," Alexander confirmed. "I have been for months, maybe longer. Maybe from those charity events when I'd watch you escape to the garden, and wish I had the courage to follow. But I wanted to wait until you were standing on your own, until you knew for certain that you didn't need me before I told you. So you would know that when I ask you this, it's not about rescue or obligation or anything except two people who choose each other." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Madison's breath caught. Alexander opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Preston had given her. It was perfect. "Madison Cole, will you marry me? Not because our families expect it, not because it makes financial sense, not because you need security, but because I love you and you love me, and because we both choose this freely. Will you build a life with me?" Madison was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she laughed and nodded. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Alexander, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Madison felt the last piece of herself that had been broken that day in this very cathedral finally heal. She had run from a wedding that would have been a cage, and in doing so, had found a love that was freedom. 3 months later, Madison and Alexander married in a simple ceremony at his house upstate, with only the people who truly mattered in attendance. Olivia was her maid of honor, standing beside Madison in a simple blue dress and crying happy tears. A handful of close friends and Alexander's sister watched as they exchanged vows they had written themselves. Madison promised to choose Alexander every day, to build a partnership based on honesty and respect and genuine love. Alexander promised to support her dreams, to celebrate her successes, and to stand beside her through whatever challenges life brought. There were no 300 guests, no photographers, no elaborate displays of wealth, just two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, promising to love each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. As they kissed to seal their vows, Madison thought about the scared girl in the wedding dress who had climbed through a window and thrown herself into a stranger's car. She had thought she was running away, but really, she had been running toward something, toward herself, toward freedom, toward a man who would love her not for who she could be, but for who she already was. That night, after their guests had left and they were alone in front of the fire, Alexander pulled Madison close. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice teasing, but with an undercurrent of genuine question. "About running from my first wedding?" Madison smiled. "Best decision I ever made, even though it cost you your family and your old life." "Especially because of that," Madison replied, "because it gave me the chance to build something real, something mine. It gave me you." Alexander kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I'm the lucky one. I got the girl who had the courage to jump into my car and trust me with her escape." Madison settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd run from my wedding and end up married to Alexander Kane, I would have thought they were crazy. And now?" "Now," Madison smiled. "Now I think maybe crazy is just another word for brave. Maybe the best things in life require a little bit of both." She felt Alexander's laugh rumble through his chest. "So what's next for us, Mrs. Kane?" "Everything," Madison replied. "Graduate school, and research, and maybe traveling to Italy like I always dreamed. Building careers, and making mistakes, and figuring it out together. Living a life that's actually ours instead of anyone else's idea of what it should be." "Sounds perfect," Alexander murmured into her hair. "Sounds like freedom." As the fire crackled and the night deepened around them, Madison thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fear and courage it had taken to run, the kindness of a stranger who had become so much more, the slow process of discovering who she really was beneath all the expectations. She had lost a lot when she climbed through that cathedral window. Her family, her social standing, the comfortable security of a planned future. But she had gained infinitely more: herself, her dreams, her agency, and a love that was built on choice and respect and genuine partnership. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run from what everyone expects and trust that you'll find your way to something better. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you throw yourself into the right car at exactly the right moment, and everything changes. Madison Cole had been that lucky. She had run from a gilded cage and found her way to genuine freedom. And in the arms of the man who had caught her when she fell, who had given her the space and support to become herself, she had discovered what love actually meant. Not performance or obligation or strategic partnership, but two people choosing each other freely every single day. The fire burned low, and they moved upstairs to the bedroom that was now theirs together. And as Alexander held her close, as they began their life as partners in the truest sense, Madison smiled into the darkness. She had been a runaway bride who hid in a stranger's car, and it had led her to everything she never knew she needed. The story that began with fear and desperation had transformed into one of courage and love and the radical act of choosing yourself. And Madison knew, with absolute certainty, that she would make the same choice again 1,000 times over. Because this life they were building together was worth every scary moment, every hard choice, every sacrifice. This was real. This was hers. This was home. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.